Hello, I'm Mara Pearl, and this is Novel Conversations. This is part two of a fantastic conversation with two good friends, very accomplished authors, Lee Murray in New Zealand and Judith Briles in the United States, where I also am. I want to do a little bit of a deep dive into your writing process for fiction.
Mm.
And so, the eternal question, Lee, are you a pantser or a plotter? And I don't even know if you use that terminology in New Zealand.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Pantser,
yes.
seat of the pants, and then plotter is sometimes called a planner, an outliner. Which would you say you are, or some combination?
Yeah, I'm a combination. I think it depends on the project. I think for a novel, I tend to be a little bit more plotty. What I tend to do for a novel, and I haven't done one for a little while, so I've been very immersed in essays and short fiction and anthology work. But for a novel, I tend to sort of know where I'm going. I've got an idea, and I write the first chapter, and I write the last chapter, and then I try and complicate things for my character until I get to the end. So it's sort of a bit of a plotty kind of pantsy sort of approach. For short stories, and I do write a lot of short stories, and often commission short stories from editors who ask me, can you write me a story on this theme? And this is the word count. So it's a very prescribed way of writing. You are writing something specific for someone else, and it needs to fit their vision. And you need to bring your own voice to it and your own style to it because they're looking for they don't want 30 stories all exactly the same. They want 30 stories on this theme, but a variety and with different intensities and that kind of thing. And there, I usually have to start with a really strong idea, and I don't choose my first idea because that will be the same idea that everybody else has had. And then I need to bring my own voice. And so do I pants it? Mostly for those I do tend to pants it. So I sort of start from the idea and then go for it. And I think I've probably got enough experience now to sort of pick the right point of view or the style. And sometimes, and I'm a little bit lucky because I've worked with some incredible editors who are very open to innovative approaches. So I've been able to experiment and try things. And if it doesn't work, well, then they'll say, oh, can you just fix this? This doesn't quite work for us. And that's the flexibility of writing, isn't it? It's not always finished until it's finished. And so, until the editor has paid for it basically, and so at that point it's still fluid. I think that's the thing to learn about writing. It's fluid until it's out there, right? And even then you can pull it back and revise it, and if it doesn't quite hit the mark. So there for a short story I tend to sort of have the kernel of idea and then I pants it, and I'm lucky enough now to be at this stage in my career where it's generally publishable. But whether it's great yet might need the input of the editor, or my critique group. So I'm lucky I'm able to sort of tend to pants those sort of those shorter things. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Interesting dealing with different structures and formats. Um,
Mhm.
Short story is a very tight structure, very,
Yeah,
very specific.
yeah.
And like screenplay is also a very, very tight structure. I think traditional romance is a very tight structure.
Yeah,
And
yes.
this world of genres that we are now in, where genres have in some ways fractured into so many multiples of subgenres, and some then have reconnected. So you have romantic horror, or you have one of the hottest new genres in is romantasy,
Yes.
particularly for younger readers. Um, and what's wonderful about that is, I think, a more targeted ability to reach our specific readers. So
Mm.
there is, something good. I remember talking to my father, who was a well-educated man and an omnivorous reader. We were talking about men's fiction, women's fiction, this kind, that kind. And he said, that doesn't matter. Is it good fiction? That's what matters. And I sometimes go back to that sort of core value, that he was sharing. But
Mm.
it's interesting because both of you, more than myself, I am basically sticking with women's fiction in my career these days. But both of you are writing in multiple genres. And Judith, nobody was more surprised than I was when you, the maven of nonfiction, suddenly said, "Oh, I'm going to write historical fiction." And I was like, "What?"
But
So
that
what
came
was that
that was
journey?
that was an odd journey. But I'm going to go back to the Panther Outliner as a nonfiction, coming from the nonfiction world. You do a lot of outlining.
Oh
You've
yeah.
got you've got to do it. But I did so many interviews. I think I counted up like 10,000 interviews of people during my nonfiction, really the nonfiction writing
As part of your
time.
research for your books?
Part of my research and that I mean I had one that I had 5,000 people respond to a survey and said I wanted to be interviewed for it, and I usually followed up. Sometimes they were short interviews, but from those interviews these unbelievable gems would drop in, ideas that I had not even thought about to include, that had to be created and chapters come into it. But when I wrote nonfiction, I knew the kickoff and I knew how it was going to end. I did know,
Yep.
really, that fiction's a different animal,
Mm.
Yes, it
on
is.
that, and that pretty much, I know, where we're going with it, but that and how I got into it was, I was a reluctant author, and one of my clients was in trouble, and he had a co-author who had abandoned him, and he would come over and mope, and I finally said, "Oh, for God's sakes, Brian, get your computer out. We're just going to get this book done." And so I said I was coming in as the friendly editor side development to get into it. And then his characters started taking me over. They would wake me up, the little buggers. And all of a sudden, I would say to Brian, Alexander would never say it that way. This is how he speaks. And then all of a sudden, I am in deep into this whole thing, and I was just going along. Brian was going to get his bloody book out, and he said, "You really are the co-author." So we came over, and then we've gone along, and we just finished the third book in the series, and I kind of had to drag him to the finish line because of some situations he was going through. And literally, I took over I knew how that book was going to end. I knew how it had to end for the fans that we developed. They would want it to go in this direction, on that. And I'm happy with that. And now we're beginning on the final book in the series for this. But I never intended to write any fiction. I always considered myself a non-fiction writer, but I always strongly believed, and we haven't kissed on some of these structures, but that a good nonfiction writer better be a storyteller. So, and that's where so much of my research came from, Lee, is I was getting these unbelievable, I learned how to interview people. I just asked one or two questions, and I just kind of, no, you're kidding, tell me more. But they would tell me stuff that was unbelievable. And what was always amazing me, I'd write them a thank you note for their time, and I'd get notes back. You're the most interesting person I ever talked to.
Oh,
Lord, I was just listening to these unbelievable stories, that their experiences and what they'd share.
Well,
Um,
story is the
was-
way we understand our lives.
yeah,
When my
yes.
my dear friend Erin and I had been actresses, and we started realizing there are two different languages, the language of the cast and the language of the crew. And we thought
mm,
there must be a book about this, and there wasn't. So we wrote a book called Act Right, and we went to each department, the sound department, the costumes, the props, and we would say, "What is it that you wish actors knew?" And they would say, "Please sit down.
wow,
I have a lot to tell you." So it's just what you
Yes.
said, Judith. Nobody had asked
yeah,
about things, and they were
Yeah.
eager to share. And some of the stories were hilarious. and some of them were less than flattering towards actors.
Yeah.
Um, and some of them were just so revelatory. Film is a collaborative art, and it's much better if everyone who's working on that set does speak the same language. So, there are funny moments where a screenwriter overheard a director say, bring me a half apple. And so the screenwriter rushed to the catering table and chopped an apple in half and brought it to him. And the director looked at him and said, what are you, nuts? So a half apple is a chopped in half box that an actor who isn't tall enough for the setting or the co-star will stand on. Alan Ladd famously always needed a half apple. And so that's what he was asking for. But it's hilarious, but it's a classic example of people.
Words matter. Words
Yes,
matter.
exactly. Exactly. So that interviewing process, I mean, I bet we could do another hour on research, which
Uh-huh.
one of my favorite topics. Okay, well, let's come back
Okay.
and talk
I'm
about
Oh,
game.
I'd love that. That would be
next.
fantastic. Can I ask you, because I just wanted to go back because I'm really intrigued. Obviously with nonfiction, you do so much research, and you need to plot it and outline what the book
Mhm.
is going to be, and then slot those extra things in when you discover them. But when you move to writing fiction, and interestingly, that wasn't on your own. That was a collaborative approach, which I've also done some collaborative work, and I know that's quite different from from your own novel approach. So did you
Absolutely.
pants that, or was that did you base the work on your collaborator's structure that was already there? How did you do, or is that really a pantsy sort of situation?
Um, he had they had it pretty much like written out. I was the better writer. I am the better writer. And so I would go, I in sports, I don't know if they do this in New Zealand League, but they have in a sports broadcasters, there's usually a team, one who's given all the data and the stats and that, and then you have the color person who kind of adds
Right.
in all the
Okay.
flavor and all that. I was the color person. I
Right.
became the
Okay.
color person. So I would come in and do all the Hansons and bring in some of the bells and whistles and a little bling and all that. But then I have an imagination, and then these damn characters were waking me up at the nighttime. So then I became actively involved in it, and all that. So and I've always been, and Mara knows me well. If you ask me my opinion, I'll tell you it. But if you don't want it, don't ask me.
Yeah.
And that I just really started jumping in, and then I started thinking of where would they go with it? How would they go about doing it? What would be more a way? And I actually, because this is about women, it's about empowering women back in the 11th century, this series, that it was, and I'm a woman, and I and and so I had really, although Brian was totally supportive of that, that I could bring in a different flavor to it, on
Right.
that. So I am, and so give me a beginning. And oh, my favorite thing is we had to get our character pregnant. Okay,
Okay.
so I've
I think
never
we know
written a
how
love.
that's done.
Yes, yes, but I've never written a love scene. I threw it at Brian, and I said, "Okay, so Brian, this is I'm going to throw this at you. You do this one." So he came back with it, and I went, "Gag me,"
One of the
and he
hardest things to write.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
and he said Judith kept 6 words, the and with, and I just took over and rewrote it. But I'm someone, if you just give me a line, what was that? There's a television show that Mara that was floating around the US for a long time that they just threw out a line, and then the actors, it was a comedy type thing, and the actors just took off and created a whole scene
Oh,
around
whose
it.
line is it anyway?
Thank you. Whose line is it?
What,
So
what's
I
my line? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I'm someone, if you just give me a few lines, I can take off and build the scene. So
What
I
a
am a
talent.
pantser. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm I'm that person doing it.
right.
So, and then when Brian was having some real health issues this last year, I said, if you can just tell me where you're thinking and kick it off, I can take it and run with it. And then he would stay with me. We always write together collaboratively online on Zoom.
Oh
Um,
wow, what an interesting process. Oh, I'm learning so much. That's such
so
an interesting way to
so so
attack a narrative.
yeah, so he would kick it off, and then I would just keep it going. And I said, "Does this sound right? Does this feel like you? Anything you want to add? Twist, going back? No, just keep going." And
That
that's
flow.
that's how we flow.
Wow.
I mentioned I had been an actor, and um, what I knew was dialogue. I had been performing
Yeah,
dialogue really
you're
my,
good at dialogue, Mara. Yeah.
and so that was a strength. But you wouldn't have wanted to read the early, versions of my novels because there was good dialogue and then terrible descriptions.
Ah,
There was
interesting.
there was no narrative voice. That's what I hadn't learned yet. And fortunately, I took the time. I mean, it was a few years of coaching, studying, hearing, listening, really getting into that. And now I would say it's really a strength. So it's evened up. I've got a balance in
Hmm.
between the description and the dialogue and bringing the reader into that reality and adjusting the point of view for
Hmm.
any given segment. But that's part of that mastery that I know all of us teach this when we're coaching people, no matter how old they are, that there are so many different components to learn as an author. We all start out with our strengths and we
Hmm.
bolster those, but then we have other fresh things to learn in order
Hmm.
to really get where we want to get as an
Hmm.
author. It's like we never really arrive. We're never done as an author, but I think it's so exciting that our books get better and better if we can resist the temptation to go back and rewrite everything.
So,
Well,
Samara, the acting book was a collaborative, also a collaborative
Yes,
yeah.
project then.
yes.
Yeah, so did you bring different strengths, the two of you, to that writing? And
Yes, it was really fun. We always say it doesn't sound like her, it doesn't sound like me, it sounded like us. So we arrived at a joint narrative voice. However, we also broke out into individual stories. So Erin would have an anecdote, something that happened to her on a set, and I felt it just needed to be in her voice, that particular story. And then we would do maybe another one of one of my stories. And so the text we did in Roman and in italics so that people could read the book. They could
And know
just read
which the
the
voice
story
was.
if they wanted to,
right.
or they could
So
ignore the stories and just read the text if they were students, and trying to really, get information. So it was a lovely project and kind of defined itself as we went along.
Well, and Mara, I mean, I've seen, I mean, I've watched Mara's evolve with her novels, and she has really developed a nice, the word I use is richness, Mara.
mm,
Thank
Your
you.
descriptions that come in that really do have a nice balance around the narrative, but you're
Much.
really there. You really take me there with this, and it is always. I just got through reading a book as what was it called? As the Water Goes, something like that. The author has really juicy lines that are rich, chewy. I like chewy on them.
Mm,
That going into descriptions, and I think, and just I marvel at people who can write like that. And it's it's just so great. I think one of the things for all of us as mentors here, we're all mentors, is I always ask people what they're reading. Well, what books are you reading that are in this genre that you're interested in writing in? And I'm always dismayed when I hear them, they're hardly reading. And I said, but you should be studying.
so we should
I,
encourage reading at every opportunity. Yeah.
oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, you just, what makes a book pop? I've sometimes, I remember I was reading years ago. I think it was Seabiscuit or something. There was some just Laura Hillbrand has some wonderful lines in there that I would call a friend and I'd say, "Can I just read this
Oh,
paragraph to
isn't
you?"
that great?
You know,
Great.
I think the collaborative thing, I think the word richness was actually the word I was going to use, Mara, when you're writing with two people. And
Mm,
then it's not your work, it's not just you, and it's not just them, and it's something different. It's a different beast, and it has this layered richness to it that you wouldn't necessarily write on your own. It's a different
that's right.
voice.
Yeah,
So for many readers that probably don't know that when you write collaboratively, one of the ways you can do it is that you both write together and you smooth it so that it looks like one voice, which sounds to me a little bit what you do, Judith, with Brian.
with
Is that right?
yes.
It seems like the two of you work together on it very, very tightly, and then you smooth it so that it looks like one author has come
Mhm,
along and done it. So I
mhm.
have a series of supernatural crime noir novels that I've written with a Maori New Zealand writer called Dan Raybarts. And we deliberately wanted to bring ourselves into these stories. So we did a he said, she said type of collaborative work, which is not like the way you've done it at all, Judith. And so we wanted both. So I write it's a story about brother sister sleuths, or their brother sister by Fongai. So the sister is a sort of Chinese scientific uptight person, sort of a little bit like me, and the other character, the other sleuth, is a Maori sort of broody bad boy. Walks in two realms kind of character. And that fits really well with Dan. He works in the security industry, so you can, in his day job, so you can see how that would work really well. And so he would write one scene in his character's voice, and I would write the other scene in my character's voice. Now we're writing both characters. We obviously have to write both characters, but I kind of had narrative control or creative control over my character, and he did over his. And
Love
then
that.
we'd have a general idea of where we're going. So here's the pantsing aspect. We had a general idea. And then I would write my chapter, and then he would write his chapter, and I would open it up and went, holy heck, how the hell am I going to explain that? He would have some massive explosion, and my character being the scientific character and explain the nitty-gritty of the procedure would have to work out how it happened. It's just,
Wow.
and the creativity there was incredible because I just never
Mm,
knew what I would open up, and we deliberately didn't sort of smooth it, if you like. We kind of wanted those very distinct voices, so it'd be chapter. So it's quite a different so I was so intrigued to hear how you have both done these. This is another talk in itself, isn't it, Mara? I'm just the whole, how do you write a collaborative piece of work when you've got two creative minds?
Yes.
But I'm just so fascinated to hear how you've both done this, and how in your work, Mara, you had those distinct moments where you're both telling your own story, and then those aspects where they're blended and you're writing together. And then Judith, you've done it all together, very tightly together, and smoothed it so it looks like one person. So
yep,
that all of
yep.
those different approaches, those creative approaches to writing a book, are so very different, and yet still collaborative and creative and bouncing off another person, which is such an exciting way to write too, isn't it?
There's this brings to mind, I don't know if you read Michael Connolly, a Los Angeles author,
Love Michael
Love
Conley.
it. Yeah,
writing too.
absolutely.
He's doing all the novel writing, but he has his Bosch character, and then he has Renee Ballard, who's a different
Yes,
detective, a female detective,
totally.
stories about cases from two
Mhm.
quite distinct points of view. But where
Yes.
the collaborative energy comes in, I think, for Michael Connolly, is with Titus Welliver, who is portraying Bosch in the series. And you know how sometimes a series or a film is disappointing compared to what was in the books. I think that is not the case here. I really enjoy them both. They're different. You can't
Hmm.
fit everything into the television series that is in the
No.
books,
Mhm.
but the series is marvelous. And I know that Connolly is experiencing a sense of awareness, inspiration, perspective
Mhm.
coming to him through his principal performer in the series. And I
Yes.
remember what that felt like when I was writing my radio drama. I had a superb cast of very experienced actors. So you write a scene for two people and then you hear their approach and then you go, ah, here's an actor who can do that kind of subtlety. So the next scene I wrote for that pair included something. Then the actor goes, ooh, this is an interesting aspect of the character. And they would build on that. And so that collaboration is a really thrilling way to work, kind of addictive. We did 100 episodes, and it was really an exciting way to work. And you know a lot about that, Lee, because you also are a screenwriter. And what a different approach it is. But
Yes, yes,
fascinating.
absolutely. I think that's a really good point. It is such a collaborative process film, as you mentioned before. And when you get a table read and you sit down after and you're analyzing that table read, what did the character bring? The things they slip in sometimes,
Yes.
sometimes they slip in language and they're reading the words, but they throw in something extra, a little bit of just to bring their expression to it. And you think, oh, actually, that really works for that character. And I did see, and sometimes that develops further in the actual filming process. So, how can we do this in a way that oh, look, we've got this opportunity, and perhaps it's something to do with the setting, or the character or the actor just brings it. They embody that character, as you know, and they bring something different that has to go in that character. It evolves. It's just such an exciting process.
So
Yeah.
I tell you a secret from acting class. I studied with Bobby Lewis, who was one of the founders of American theater, and he wrote a book called Method or Madness, which was very informative for the whole industry. And he also wrote advice to the players. And in this, he talks about the left page. And this always was so incredible as a tool as an actor. So when you get your pages, when you're going to perform, all the dialogue is written on the right side of the page. There's nothing on the left. Bobby said, but you own the left page. And this is where you write your notes. And this is what you focus on is the motive. So, and then he would give a very funny example from Hamlet. So he'd say, how do most actors approach that iconic line? Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well. And he said, but when you listen to that kind of a reading of that line, what's the subtext? And he said, to me, it sounds like, I'm going to give you an Oscar. He said, but think about the real motive here. What's really going on for Hamlet in that moment? And it's shock and grief and the passage of time and how temporal things, how temporary life can be. And so there's just this private musing. He's holding a skull. And so it's, damn it, I knew this guy. So that changing the motive is what changes the performance.
Mm.
So your own choices as an actor can show up on that left page. And frankly, if the writer hasn't given you enough subtext, then you as the actor must supply it. So, but you as the writer, you want to add that richness that we're talking about. You want to have enough subtext, enough backstory that it can be chewy, like you said, Judith, that the actor can
Mhm.
go, ooh, I can really sink my teeth into this and bring something, to this
Mm.
scene.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So bringing all that to when you're writing a novel is so much fun because I'm writing a novel, but I'm still writing scenes, right? I'm writing these moments between
Yes.
people. And what do they
Yeah.
bring? What are they afraid of? What are they hoping for? All
Mhm.
their motives. That's what's important in that scene.
Yeah. I think I'm so glad you brought up Michael Connolly because he is one of my favorite authors, and I like the continuity of him. He hasn't farmed out his writing to other people, and there's several writers I've dropped that I was a fan of that I wouldn't even buy again. It kind of reminds me of something you said earlier, Lee, about publishing in general. You know, no one, I don't know of anyone who's bought another book and said, "Oh, what another fine book from Simon and Schuster." No, they're looking for the author or the title or, or their fan or whatever it is. And not too long ago, now and I don't want to leave the collaboration talk, which this is another talk, but there was a situation, that book that came out last year was supposed to be a humongous book. I don't know how many it sold. It was called Volcano, and it was an unfinished script from Michael Crichton.
Yes.
And the widow reached out to James Patterson, and I remember watching an interview to finish it.
Mhm.
And of course, Patterson farms all his stuff out, basically. I don't know
Sadly.
what he writes. I don't know what he writes on his own now, but that he gloated on a show that he was being interviewed on about this big book coming out called Volcano, Hawaii, and that you would not be able to tell when he stepped in. And that I took that as a personal challenge. And I just said, I will know because I read all Michael Crichton's and that clearly I got to point, I said, here it is. This is this is the cross. This is
And
the
that's the author voice.
yeah, that's that author voice that comes in.
Yes. Yes.
A different kind of words were being used now. Different variations. The tone and the timing of the pace as
Mhm.
we move forward. You know, you could sense all of that if you were a follower of that reader on that. But it goes back to, one of my advice to all our listeners is you need to read other authors to see what they do then. And I think there's a fear, especially if they're reading same genre. I think that there is this fear that, well, maybe someone will accuse me of picking up a line or using an idea or whatever, instead of understanding you have a master writer at your fingertips, at your eyeballs, that's teaching you part of the craft. I mean, that's the way I kind of look at it.
Yeah.
But I have to thank Lee. First of all, Lee, I want to know, I don't read horror. That's not my thing. Of your books, what would you recommend? Because I want to go buy one or two.
Oh, look, I have this series here called the Tane
Into the
McKenna
Mist?
series, Into the Mist, which I've
Okay,
just re-released. That they're about 10 years old now.
that's
Um,
fine.
but my latest book is actually poetry.
Okay.
Um, and it's called Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud. Tells the story of Chinese New Zealand women through the lens of the shape-shifting fox spirit of Chinese mythology. So,
Whoa.
Fantastic. And I am interested in the book that you co-wrote with your Maori
yeah. Oh,
colleague.
yeah, that series is called the Path of Ra series. It's from Raw Dog Screaming Press. And yes, so that's there's three books in that trilogy. So the first one is called Hounds of the Underworld.
Okay. I
And
look
I
forward to that.
okay,
And
and I just have to say I love the line that your husband, you said your husband asked you about you, what caper you were on, or what was it that you said earlier?
I don't know. He
Okay,
said, "Stop talking about it," he said to me, "and get on with it." Is really what he said.
but I love that. I thought, yeah, we write papers because I love that.
I also
Yes.
have a super supportive husband who, has goosed me sometimes to get on with it. And I so appreciate the support.
It
Mhm.
It's
really is
amazing.
great to have,
Yeah.
and I think that's the essence of mentorship, isn't it? Having someone in your corner who invested in your story, who believes that you have what it takes to go forward and finish, a piece of work that will connect with readers. So yeah, I think having someone in your corner means so much.
It really does. And we're fortunate, all of us, to have really phenomenal partners and also to have each other. Because,
Yes.
anytime either of you is bringing out a new book, I want to know about it. I want to share with my followers. Um, I would just love to continue to help you promote your beautiful, wonderful work, which I think is significant and important. So I'm going to post an end card for each of you that shows some book covers and your websites. Is there anything you want to add about how best to find your books? I'm assuming, Lee, that your books will be available anywhere in the US and in the UK and elsewhere.
Mostly, yes. Yes, mostly. Fox Spirit is pretty much in New Zealand, but it's available as an ebook. So
Okay.
my literary agent's looking for a North American and UK publishers for it at the moment. So, but it's
Okay.
but it is available as an ebook. So I guess it's available everywhere. So.
Okay, very good. And I know, Judith, you and I have both had bestsellers in New Zealand and Australia, so I know our books are available there.
We love ya.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you both so very much. This was just a fantastic conversation, both conversations. And I hope that we will speak again. My very, very best to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you for
having
having us.
us
Yes.
and introducing me to Lee.
My
Yes,
pleasure.
an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having us, Mara, and really lovely to meet you, Judith, and learn so much from you.
Yeah.